My name is J. David Spurlock. I've written about 40 books on the history of comics art. Hopefully you have a couple in your collection. I met first met Jack in it's either 77 or 79. My memory's starting to fade. 77 or 79. And we stayed friends to the end, and was friendly with Roz. And I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. I've known Mike for a while. This is the first time I've met Barry. And today we're going to talk about Kirby consciousness and how Barry Ira Geller and Mike Royer and Jack Kirby saved the world, and things that sound outlandish, but you're going to find out how it really is relates to the real world and the history of the project's adaptation of Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light, and also how it all ties to the movie that hopefully you saw, Argo. All right? So here we have Mike Royer. Jack had many great collaborators over his long career, but once he connected with Mike around 69 or 70.
It was around 69, late one evening. The phone in the kitchen was ringing. I was walking from my studio across the backyard. I picked up the phone, said, "Hello? Mike Royer, this is Jack Kirby. Alex Hill says you're a pretty good inker." So Jack Kirby called me.
On the recommendation of Alex Hill. Just the idea that Alex and Jack were talking is pretty cool. And at the time you were working with Russ Manning?
I was working with Russ Manning. I was drawing comic book stuff for Gold Key, Hanna-Barbera comic books, and I was also moonlighting in the animation business, laid out 1/3 of the first Spider-Man Saturday morning cartoon shows.
And the year before, you'd worked on the original Marvel cartoons in '66.
Yeah, I worked on those limited animation Marvel superheroes.
And one of your co-workers was Doug Wildey of...
yeah, that's how I met Doug Wildey, Mel Kiefer, Mike Ahrens, who was my real mentor.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we're going to get to our lead feature today, Barry Ira Geller. And Barry's worked in television and film and met Jack. Well, how would you like to start into this?
After getting through with film school, I had this idea of finding a spiritual project that changed people's lives. And one of my favorite novels was Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light. And I spent a year working in television as an associate, and I got really familiar with, attorneys, agents, and that's part of the business. And one thing led to another, and I found Lord of Light, and I optioned it. And so for a while, I got this idea that I went to different artists who I wanted to have develop it, and I couldn't find it. I kept saying to people, do something like Jack Kirby, because I've really been out of the whole comics thing, as strange as it may sound, for about 10 years, 12 years. Back in when Galactus first showed up in '48, my whole consciousness was blown apart in the Bronx, and so here I am. I'm about 30 or so. Yes.
Now, if you're not familiar with Zelazny, he's one of the top science fiction writers of all time. And Jack read science fiction his entire career, going back to probably the 20s, but definitely at least the 30s. He's an avid reader of science fiction pulps and was always into that. But when you first read the Zelazny in '68, it struck you that it's science fiction.
Well, I liked Roger Zelazny had this ability to make fantasy very real. You have the god of death smoking a cigarette after capturing whatever. Well, they had modern parlance language in the late '60s, but with these people were gods of the Hindu pantheon, and they came from a planet called Earth, URTH. They come to another place after blowing up their planet. This is the Lord of Light story. And they turn themselves into Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, all the powerful gods, because they have technical immortality. They literally, you can take a bath and change your body, shift your consciousness into the new body, and stuff like that, like changing your clothes. And this is where Roger Zelazny was at, and that's where I was at around again, we synchronize times here, it's funny, but around I purchased it, or optioned, in 1977, and by the early part of 78, I found out that Jack Kirby lived in California. So I had this idea, why not just call up Jack Kirby? And I did, and we became really good friends, and I found him to be in another planet, in another galaxy, in another universe, in another system entirely, and it was like, oh, hi, because that's where I was. I couldn't find myself to fit myself into any place, wherever I was. And so, and he recognized that in me. I didn't know you guys. You guys, all these guys are so great, but I just had these ideas, and I wanted to expand people's imagination. So
I would say Jack was he's very down to earth in so many ways, and just a regular guy from Brooklyn.
And that's where, he was when I met him in 1970, late 77, and he was, in fact, let me see if I could, oh God, how do I get this down? He was at this place, can't do it, so where he wanted to change the world. And I was building a theme park. I wanted to build a theme park, that's right, please, where all the statues of the gods, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, were all part of this illustrious park. This is something that we were going to do in Colorado, so Jack wasn't designing any comics here. It's very important. This was about magic. This was about everything we can sit down and think about. And here's a novel from Lord of Light. This is the goddess Kali that I'm also developing at the moment, but this is what I took Jack.
When you started talking to him about Zelazny, was he familiar with Lord of Light yet?
No, but he didn't have to be.
Well, we talk about Jack Kirby's consciousness, and everything that Jack ever wrote and drew, he drew upon or channeled his entire life, his growing up on the mean streets and not wanting to be one of the dead-end kids. He aspired for something other than that. This is a guy who, when he wore comic books, knew what he was talking about because he fought in the trenches and had his buddies blown away right in front of him. And all of this stuff was in Jack's consciousness and wrapped around this whole idea of morality and our place in the universe and who we were and how we looked at our lives and good and evil and so on. And I think he also took all of his young growing up religious teachings, and all of this was involved in his storytelling and was his consciousness. So when you met Jack, you met this down-to-earth guy next door who was so incredibly smart and was always creating, and he was the perfect man for Barry to talk to, because I think Jack was ready to immerse himself in something even more godlike than he had intimated in his comic books with Galactus
exactly
and
right.
Silver Surfer and all the
gods,
characters.
Asgard, etc.
Well, to us, when I was working with Jack Kirby, it wasn't an imaginary universe. It was this universe. Why I named this panel Jack Kirby's Consciousness is because his religion and his background, this was a living reality. And how it got into his comic work is the biggest mystery of all, except that he was totally there. So I'm approaching him with a book that's all about the Hindu gods and how they control this new planet called Earth. And I want to build a theme park, and I said, hey, we'll get a whole bunch of people to work under you. You're the general. And there were each one of these structures, which I'm going to go into in just a second, was his architecture. We would sit down for a few hours and imagine what these buildings would look like. I go to Century City in Los Angeles, there's huge places, like 10, 20, 30-story buildings, holography, and we would invent stuff together. In my background, I've always had a science background, and I even actually have 2 computer science patents, which they put up in the slides here, but like identity verification systems. Anyway, I think you can see that up there. And so Jack, I'm just going to show you a few things about him. And here's Mike. He's the guy with the glasses.
My Clark Kent glasses.
And here's this is Mike. Mike actually inked the Silver Surfer. When I first met Jack, he handed me the graphic novel of the Silver Surfer that he had just completed, and I feel if you well, there it is. You inked that. Okay. Here's what's so interesting. I'm building this theme park. Jack is designing. We'd have monthly meetings coming up with all these different drawings. The theme park was a half a mile high, 2/3 of a mile long, and it's enclosed with a giant dome built and designed, or built by 3M and designed by Buckminster Fuller. At one time, and he tried to air condition Manhattan in the 60s, and they went, get out of here. So, but I took him seriously, and here we are, Ray Bradbury, Paolo Soleri, if anybody remembers him from arcologies, Ray Bradbury, John Chambers, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, the Oscar for the Planet of the Apes, and Jack Kirby, and a man named Don Broadbent, who was big holography guy. He was building buildings that had the face of real image holograms, and then we ran into some problems.
Ran into some what?
Problems with local, one of the guys, well, the mayor and all these guys, they got caught with a little fraud, a little this, a little that.
Politics, imagine.
and so we hit a brick wall, and then the next thing I know, here's a backwrap on this, the CIA, enter the CIA, which I didn't find out until 20 years later. I'm in a production meeting in a room. I had this house on Hollywood, Mulholland Drive. John Chambers is over here, and some other guys over there, art director's there, and we're talking about casting Brahma, the big guy. And we're talking about Marlon Brando. And John Chambers says, oh, I can make him look younger. I do that all the time for the CIA. And we all turned around.
Chambers is the one that worked on Planet of the Apes.
Yes, he won the Oscar for the Planet of the Apes, and that's who my makeup man was. I had a lot of guys, you know, I go to them and say, hey, I'm That's what a producer does. You know, he gets ideas and makes them somehow into reality if he doesn't rip you off. So, or both. So, never
It may
mind.
rip you off and make you that's if you're lucky.
Never mind. But we all turned around and we went, yeah, right, John. Like, you work for the CIA. But in fact was, when I ran into a problem with my theme park, we didn't know, but what John had done is that he had taken the screenplay, my screenplay, and Jack's drawings that we designed together, which I'll show you in 1 second, and they used it.
What year would this have been when
This
you
is
were-
1979, meeting, that was around August.
When he told you he could make...
That was around August,
79.
somewhere around July, yeah, 79. Thing is like, as you'll see, the real problem started, I'm getting ahead a little bit, but they had failed. The CIA, State Department had failed to come up with an idea, and then when I hit the wall with my science fiction land,
An idea to do what? The CIA had failed to...
and
come up
to
with
get
an
those guys out of Iran.
idea. When the Shah was
That's right.
taken out...
That's
and
right.
Ayatollah came in.
And here's what I am talking about. Why this is called the consciousness of Jack Kirby. And so this actually shows up, Argo, if you can, there we go. Is it, you see it? There we go.
Did you want to aim it at this?
No. You know, like, I actually saw this in the Hollywood Reporter. Robert Seidel is a guy, like, was a makeup guy, and suddenly he's producing this whole thing. I actually had at the time an office there. Next.
There has been a dramatic development concerning other Americans in Iran, who probably would also be hostages today, except for...
When the embassy was overrun, we were immediately on a wartime footing. Along comes a memorandum from the State Department saying, by the way, 6 of our people escaped, and they're in the care of the Canadians. Could you please think about how you might get them out too? So now we got a problem. How are we going to get them out ahead of hostile pursuit?
The Iranians don't know they're there.
But they will rather soon. My biggest problem, creating a deception that everybody could believe in. A Hollywood location scouting party. We stole the script from The Lord of Light. It was a defunct production. Mythology, sci-fi, and mystical things. If you read the script, it is very hard to follow. It is very convoluted. My guys went in, set up the production offices on the old Columbia Studio lot in Hollywood. This is a Friday. By Tuesday, 4 days later, we were up and running.
You're posing as a Hollywood producer making a fictitious script, Lord of Light.
Yes. The telephone that somebody's going to answer, oh yeah, they're out there scouting a location. And then we made this portfolio that had everything in it that I would carry along with me, and that's the window dressing. Say, okay, that's you, and that you're the location manager, you're transportation coordinator, the set designer, and they all just loved it. You know, everybody wants to be from Hollywood. And we arrived on the 25th of January. We went in and marched them out 3 days later.
What happens at the end of Lord of Light?
I have no idea. I didn't have time to read it.
Now, that was really what happened. The film Argo is a Hollywood film of a Hollywood film of a Hollywood film. It's about half right, but that's okay, because it brought to light the reality of how Jack and I and these other guys were all like children together. They're very famous. I assembled the biggest team I could find in the world of like these scientists and artists, And we were just children because the money was coming in. And we were looking at finally accomplishing, I said to John, okay, so you made 20th, $100 million. How about now making $100 million for yourself? So we would just invent stuff. And then these guys come along, and what they did is that on the left is my original. We had a coloring contest, and then they took that, and they just, wherever it said Lord of Light, they just put in Argo. And really,
With no permission and no
we
communication with you.
never even knew anything until 20 years later when Mr. Mendez got on some TV show. I get a phone call, hey, we want to use some of the Lord of Light stuff. And I go, what? And they say, well, they give me a number, and I said, put another 0 on it. And they went, oh, but blah, blah, blah. Okay. I hung up, and I totally forgot about it.
It's good when you add a 0 and they say, okay.
I had no idea what they were talking about. They found me somewhere. Well, not hard to find. Anyway, but that was that show, First Person.
So the government didn't ask permission, but when they made the documentary, they had to ask permission. They had to cover.
That's right, because they found out, when Mr. Mendez said the defunct film company, he thought I was dead. Why else he say that kind of stuff? I stole the script from Lord of Light.
And this is all going on just a couple of months after your last meeting with John
Yes.
we were talking about.
Yes. Right after we had our press conference in late November '79, 2 weeks later, I get this call from my attorneys that I had an arrest warrant for myself, and that we never been able to prove which came first, the chicken or the egg, but the arrest warrant or the CIA discovering the movie because of the Iran situation. But this is the Spy Museum. I'm going to flash forward a little bit.
You going to leave us hanging there? You're not going to tell us what the charge was? Was it federal? Was it local?
It probably is not a good idea,
but the CIA was involved?
We've never been able to conclusively prove anything other than the fact that my supervising producer had taken funds in without having proper securities, and so my name's all over the place, and suddenly I'm turning myself into jail. On the website Lord of Light, there's a picture of me, with a shit-eating grin, and like being taken out by,
Watch your language.
Sorry about that. Being taken to jail. But that's around that time is when John had my contention was it was his idea from the beginning to do a film thing, and he had just the script. But
Let's back up just for a second, because Mike had inked all this.
That's
So
right.
Tell us about how you were brought into the project. Was it Jack that called you? Did
Well,
you meet?
Jack just called me and he said, I've got a project I'm doing. It's not comic books. It's something totally different, and I want you to ink and letter it, and that's all he told me about it. So I got these incredible drawings, and like there's only maybe if we count Ross, 4 people in the world that ever saw the pencils to this art. That would be Jack, Roz, Barry, and myself, who then got to ink and letter it.
I never saw the pencil.
And at the time, my feeling was this is some of the finest work I have ever seen from Jack, because it's not comic books, but it's this stylization that Jack had evolved over his whole career, and then using it to visualize these themes that he and Barry had talked about in their get-togethers, and then creating these incredible architectural drawings that I found it kind of mind-blowing. I said, this is just incredible
I think that's what Barry had in mind.
And so all I know is that the checks came from someone named Barry Ira Geller, and that's all I was told about it.
Now, how does the theme park connect to the movie, the proposed movie?
Well, it was paying for the movie. out of the parking lot. I mean, had bankers and...
Oh, you had finance supporting the theme park.
That's right, and that's what was paying for the movie.
Is that what got you in trouble?
Yes.
Oh, well, the plot thickens. I bet you did. Did you mention that at the panel last year?
Well, I mean, it wasn't...
No, this is all new for this year's panel.
We're breaking new ground here.
Well, I didn't do anything wrong that didn't cost more than $10,000 to say, hey, Jim, hi, Joe. Okay, fine. He wasn't in town when that document was signed. My name was forged on something, and, I just don't want to get into under the rocks where other snakes may lie.
Our name in the X part come back to haunt you.
That's true.
Yeah, but if the guy's still alive, he may come looking for him.
You don't want that. Anyway, so it's fascinating. You're right. It's all intermixed. We have this, the Terminal of the Gods. The reason, we saw that in the Spy Museum. You can recognize it right there. You see it on that.
Well, let me interrupt to simply say the important thing about the whole thing we're here to talk about is that the CIA, under the guise of a movie company coming to Iran to make this film, it's Jack's drawings. They convinced them that they were serious about making this movie.
That's
they
right.
looked at this stuff and they somehow identified with what Jack and Ira or Barry had put into creating these things. And that's Jack's consciousness is what really sold the Iranians and ultimately wound up freeing hostages.
And that
Save lives.
That is what we're all about here. In fact, I was being interviewed a couple of years ago by the sons of the Iranian revolutionaries, and who are now kind of wealthy in art places, and I asked him what was his favorite of all the drawings, and to my real surprise, it was the Terminal of the Gods, and it was because it represented to them the leaving of the Shah and the return of their religion, and so I'm going to do a little thing right now. This, if you look at the right side, this guy on the right, that is something new. And I'm going to get back to this in just a second, because this is the extension of this.
There's also a 3D rendering of it. You may be able to see.
Right.
Well,
This is, just got this in, and we're in the midst of Mike and I coming out with a color and maybe possibly inking of the same thing all over again. I'll get to it in a moment. But this is the continuity of the consciousness that I call the reincarnation of Jack Kirby. And it just doesn't end. I'm going to go forward a little bit here, but that is what the whole thing was about there. I was about 6, I think, and I was sitting in my room in the Bronx. I was reading a comic book, and on the back was Build Your Own Spaceship, like $4.95.
When I was 12 years old, and I looked at the planet Mars, and I said, take me home.
I remember looking at this spaceship and just had this feeling I was born too soon. What am I doing here?
I'm a guy who lives with a lot of questions.
Questions about why man happens to be in the universe.
I say, what's out there?
I'm not after the truth. The truth probably doesn't even exist.
I wanted to start the word of mouth that some people from Hollywood are here in Colorado with this insane idea to do this gigantic science fiction land.
I didn't want to just build another theme park. What I wanted to do is get new technologies out, change the culture.
The idea was to take this script into the Ministry of National Guidance of the Iranian government and sell them on the movie.
All of us, we're just creating our own reality.
What espionage is about is
creating a cover story, creating illusion, and making people buy it.
He says, we got to dress you up. We got to make you into the new wonder kind.
The ability to fantasize is the ability to grow. You dream yourself into a shape.
People were astounded by the scope of what we were talking about. Jet tube transporters, magnetic levitation, lasers, a revolving garden.
And it was going to be going like that, and so you were going to turn weightless all of a sudden?
We wanted something that had a mythological sci-fi kind of context to it.
It looks like a scam, and the correct question is, who's getting scammed?
We found the Lord of Light script.
It seemed like someone was out to get us.
The shit hit the fan, you should excuse the expression.
The mayor was charged, a city council member was charged.
The cops are here. They've come here to arrest us.
It's a little bit of a high-stakes game.
This arresting thing was a crock of shit.
We're going to set up this grand deception.
It's all a lie.
We changed the title of the movie from Lord of Light to Argo. Everywhere that it said Lord of Light, now it says Argo.
Was I conning myself? I don't know.
Everything ends in mystery.
I can't tell the difference between the con man, the spies of the CIA, or what I was trying to do. That's the strangest thing.
The lands of eastern Arapahoe County, where science fiction land is planned, will still house his dream. He says his arrest is not the end, but just the beginning. Ned Walker, Region 2 News.
All right. I'm going to quickly go through some of these drawings that Jack and I designed.
And Roy.
And I've always called Mike Rain Man because I never met him at that time. I would just, after a few days or so of talking with Jack, and that was really like we were traveling. It was like buckle up and we get into a car or an interdimensional car and we go some places and we just be talking. It's so hard to say, well, no, I mean, Jack do this or Jack do that. Very rarely did I actually say something like that. It was mostly like, I want to talk about or see a certain, like this was Restaurant Row, and it had all the statues from the Lord of Light gods. Sam, which has kind of gotten pretty popular, or from Mahasamatnam. He can bend electrical and gravity and fly around, and he's the hero.
Besides the original plan film, and then the stopping of that, and then the use of CIA with Argo to save lives, but this material has seen life since then in multiple occasions.
Yes.
There was the art portfolio. Was that Dark Horse that released that?
Heavy metal.
Well, there was the color. Heavy metal did the color. Wasn't there a black and white version before that?
No, that's just the museum, Tom Kraft, who's re-digitized everything in the last few years, and here we have it. Museum level quality, all goes to the Kirby Museum, well, some of it. This, what I call the northeast corner of heaven, is a bunch of different ideas, whether it be a planetarium or the reverse of the pyramids. I'm not going to get into it because we're unfortunately running out of time, but here's a very good point. I'm talking, Jack, I want to build one of these buildings about the consciousness of Brahma. And that's what he first gave me. And I went, well, how do you tell Jack Kirby? Nah. But I did. And I said, well, this is kind of be hard. This is Jack Kirby. This is Jack Kirby.
His job is to be creative. Now you have to produce it.
And then I got him to do that.
Well, Jack was the consummate storyteller. If you were to ask him, he'd say, I'm a storyteller. Right. And this is Jack telling stories in these frozen two-dimensional drawings that you can look at and follow all kinds of routes and stories and things that are going on one drawing. And you asked a question one time that you weren't quite sure exactly what his perspective was on the drawings. And I think I said, basically, they were done so that it was our perspective.
That's right.
Not Jack's, but
You're
when
up
we
there
looked at it,
somewhere.
what it said to us.
That's right.
What his storytelling abilities did for us. And, you know, we kind of absorbed indirectly his consciousness.
That's a very good way of putting it. I call it the unity of life, where we all intimately sort of are perceptive of each other. And this became the revolving gardens that is in Lord of Light, the novel. And the heads revolve in a different direction. And like, this is where there's references where Brahma takes Kali to his chamber to save Sam's life. When my architect engineering guys looked at this, they had a heart attack. Cantilever Gardens, are you kidding me? Remember, 1978, 79, there was no jet tube transporter. There is now. There was no, there was magnetic levitation, but now it's a whole other scene. We were looking at 40 years from now. And anyway, there's Brahma. I'm going to quickly go through this. What do we got here? We got about 10 minutes. So,
Yeah, I want to say as much love as the fans, the readers, and the people who got to meet Jack were able to share with him. It's just amazing, and this is so representative of how far his influence goes beyond what he could imagine. You know, he never imagined that this project, you know, they hope to make a theme park, they hope to make a major motion picture and to test the boundaries of what technology could do at that time. That's a huge vision. You know, they're testing the edges there. He never thought, oh, this is going to save people's lives. You know,
actually, he did.
And how,
he did. He said it's. I can't pull it up, but his quote was in an interview was that this will change life as we know it. That was his purpose,
right.
Working on Lord of Light.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't. It's
changed life. A little different from save lives. But I mean, you could interpret that. You could interpret.
You're right. I'm unfortunately here.
But it's unfortunate that he passed before the information of the CIA and the whole Argo project came to light.
Well, here, let's go on. Well,
there and more things can come to life. It could be decades before we know all the
it's true.
Many different ways that Jack continues to touch people's lives.
Well, in this case, these are actual sets from the novel Lord of Light, and hopefully there'll be sets in the future TV series.
Well, when I received Jack's pencils, a couple pieces at a time, although I was told very little about what this was, I knew that this was something important, because I consider this some of the finest work I'd ever seen from Jack, because it was a totally different kind of storytelling than a 6-panel grid comic book page. It was these large environments. And I still look at these drawings all these years later, and not because I had anything to do with them. It's like, I was lucky I had something to do with them, but I look at them, it's like, these things are so impressive. And I guess of all the work I did for Jack, I could truly list this as being mind-blowing.
Well, you know, you said a very interesting thing to me earlier, Mike, was that other artists would treat Jack's pencils as one thing, but you went Warner Brothers.
Well, if anybody knows the history of the motion picture studios, people sometimes would ask me to explain the difference between myself and Joe Sinnott. And I'd say Joe Sinnott inked Jack Kirby, MGM. And Mike Royer inked Jack Kirby, Warner Brothers. And meeting Jack and knowing from the beginning that his favorite movies were Warner Brothers, and he grew up with their programmers from the 30s, that they put on the screen only enough information to tell the story. You didn't have to have casts of thousands and all kinds of gloss. And of course, in my opinion, the best Warner Brothers movies that weren't made by Warner Brothers were a couple of MGM films where they literally took Warner Brothers casts and added some gloss to them. But Jack put on the paper what was necessary to sell the story. As Alex Toth would say, no hay. No lines, and if there were a line there, there was a reason for it, and it told the story. And I felt my responsibility to Jack was to complete his pencils in ink.
Which you did beyond anyone's dreams, certainly mine, because like up front, they show the texture, again, of his perception and his concept of deity. It brings forth, and I'm gonna go a little ahead here. This, I mean, in the end, I said, Jack, here's a blueprint, and here's where everything goes. And he turned it around, and so the kind of partnership of how this guy ruined me forever, but working hardly with anyone else for the rest of my life, because the vision was more important. For him, life was the vision. Now, I am gonna end this with where we're taking Jack's work and Roger Zelazny's work right now. On the right is one of the gods that's actually about this tall. It started with a 3D, and as you can see on the right, and then became the model after being airbrushed. Kali, a sketch, Kali airbrushed, that amazing. I'm going to go forward again, 3D on the left, and then airbrushed on the right. And here we are again with our Terminal of the Gods, introducing this guy over here, Bingo. And this is like a few days old. I just got it in from the factory, and it's shrouded in mystery. Can't say much right now, other than the fact that I believe I've taken upon myself, as crazy as I may be, to reinvent Jack's work, and that's it. There it is. And I think we're
out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Royer and Barry Aaron.